I wrote She Took Justice, the Black Woman, Law, and Power, because I've been researching and writing over several years, and I started to see these Black women's stories in which she was either a plaintiff or defendant, or she was using law to liberate herself or using law to liberate her community, challenging unfair laws based on race and gender. And I said, why don't I know more about these stories? And the more I researched, the more I saw that it began hundreds of years ago. In each of these cases, I saw time and time again women who defied the odds, who said, I don't care what your law says, I am a full human being. And they then would bring their own lawsuits demanding their freedom. They would also challenge the laws themselves, or they would say, I know what the criminal consequences are. I know that they could be beaten, they could be jailed, they could be killed. And yet they decided that they would press forward. She Took Justice is inspiring for our young people. They need to know that these women existed, that Queen Nzinga, the warrior queen in Angola, fought the Portuguese to try to stop the slave trade, and that the Black witches of Salem existed, that it was empowering to have Phyllis Wheatley, the first Black female poet who was published in North America, to have to prove that she's creative. That creativity, that brilliance is what we see in the work of Toni Morrison today. Once we know the full rounded version of American history, we have a better understanding of ourselves. We're seeing Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. We see Beyonce. We see Michelle Obama. We see Misty Copeland, a prima ballerina. We see these women today, the Williams sisters and so many others. They are part of history. They are the creation from many generations of women. They just happen to have been given the opportunity to shine. Their opportunities, their existence then, is something that we can learn from based on the past, in the present, so that we can make a better future. Each one of us needs to take justice. And in She Took Justice, we see example after example of true stories of women who did just that.
Hi, I'm AJ Sam, an independent publisher and author of this book, A Journey for Abiri, an historical fiction novel. This story spans 15 years before the start of the U.S. Civil War. This is the first book in a tetralogy. All the books have the same title, A Journey For, but different subtitles. The commonality in the subtitles is the Yoruba language. I use this because the Yoruba language was the predominant language in the West Central region of Africa during the Middle Passage. The first title, the first subtitle, Abire, is Yoruba for beginnings. The second subtitle, Okurin, is Yoruba for a man. The third subtitle, Obowo, is Yoruba for respect. And the final subtitle in this tetralogy, Bigba, is Yoruba for acceptance. I organized the journey for Iberia into 4 divisions. Who am I? The Uglies, Run into the Future, and Transitions. I did that for 2 reasons. One, to create 4 stories within the story, each correlating to a stage of development of the main character's lifespan, from a child to a young adult. As a recently retired elementary school educator, I recall seeing kids coming in as a kindergartner and 6 years later leaving as middle schoolers. They are the same people, but then again, not really. They've matured, they've grown up, they've self-discovered. I wanted that to be part of your reading experience, seeing James mature right before your eyes. And secondly, I created these divisions to give my readers, to give you a chance to catch your breath, to pause, to reflect, then contemplate where the narrative had led you and the possibilities of where it would be taking you. My novel is a 390-page book. However, 50 of the pages of it can be attributed to my writing style. You see, I place dialogue in separate paragraphs and separate lines instead of embedding them into existing paragraphs, which usually happens. Research shows it makes a book easier to follow. It makes the flow easier, especially when there are multiple characters engaging in multiple conversations, as what happens several times in my book. The first division of A Journey for Abire is Who Am I? There, James, the protagonist, is taken from his family and sold into slavery at the age of 6 to be the playmate of the master's son, Carlton. Isolated in the big house, he interacts with Ruth, the only other slave living there, and she feels his maternal void. Spending much of his time alone during the day, he clandestinely self-educates himself in the only room he's forbidden to go in, Master Johnson's study, and begins his journey of self-discovery. In The Uglies, James is introduced to the brutality of slavery in all its manifestations as he is exiled to the slave quarters. James, 9 to 14 years old of age at this point, develops his first friendship with one slave, Isaac, falls in love with another slave, Chloe, as he learns to survive this more physical form of slavery, and his sense of self continues to develop. In Run into the Future, James, now 14 to 18 years old, his body filled with rage, has his awareness of self and his situation grow and evolve. His first escape attempt fails, but he eventually escapes to the north with help from others. There he discovers a tenuous freedom that is criminally limited. Finally, in Transitions, James acclimates himself to the late 1850s, early 1860s New York City. With the support of abolitionists and others, he finds employment and enters college, where he befriends Bobby Harris, a free Black from Boston, who had been introduced throughout the novel. And finally, James matures into a soul-searching 20-year-old man. The writing of A Journey for Abire has been a journey for me. For 20 years, first putting pencil to paper, then fingertips to keys, then writes, rewrites, and revisions. This book developed from a college assignment to random thoughts and ideas to a cohesive tale, and now to this, a published novel. The first 10 years of my journey in writing A Journey for Iberia, I spent hours in the libraries of the St. Petersburg and Tampa, Florida campuses of the University of South Florida, researching historical documents that span these tumultuous times of the novel setting. But with the invention of the glorious Google and its sensational search engines, the efficiency of my research increased 100-fold. Indeed, my research changed my narrative in several places. One place in particular, I had planned on having James hold President Lincoln on the level of esteem reserved for Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman. But then one night after a long day of work and several rewrites, I stumbled across Lincoln's initial State of the Union address of March 4th, 1861. And it changed that section of the story. Lincoln said this, and I quote and paraphrase: "Apprehension seems to exist among people of Southern states that by the accession of a Republican administration, their property ought to be taken and endangered." Yeah, their property. Lincoln referred to slaves as property, supporting the dreadful Dred Scott decision. Later on, Lincoln adds in his address, "I have no purpose, directly or indirectly, to interfere with the institution of slavery. I have no lawful right to do so and no inclination to do so." So after reading this section of his address 5 or 6 more times, I went to bed to sleep on it. I just kept telling myself I must be misreading something. I must not be understanding something. I woke up the next morning and neither the words nor the meaning had changed. I had to accept, I had to recognize that this was a historical fact. So what do? Keep the story as it is? Absolutely not. This is historical fiction with the emphasis on historical truths. I began to rewrite as my point of view became James's point of view of Lincoln. We know Lincoln's role in the emancipation of slaves, but that's not what he said on March 4th, 1861. Then he was no longer a champion of the African-American cause, no longer representing the political party of the abolitionists. He was nothing more than a politician selling out. Oh yeah, I had plenty of starts and stops, self-doubts and obstacles like this, but God. I always love seeing that, but God. See, but God's plan for me didn't include failure. God took these tests and made them my testimony. God took the trials and made them my triumphs. God took those parts I got stuck on and helped me stick to his plan. And like his promises, God's plan is always good. Because of the grace of God and his divine mercy, this book, A Journey for Iberia, has come to fruition. And it is more than I ever imagined it would become 20 years ago. Now, before I continue, I need to make this point. Yes, I'm a recently retired elementary school educator, and I am forever a Baptist preacher sharing the gospel of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. But this book, this novel is written for a mature audience. A Journey for Iberia doesn't have any gratuitous language or violence. One of my reviewers said it best, however, when she wrote that it is raw, R-A-W, raw. Some of the vocabulary is offensive, especially to me as an African-American male and as a man of God. Several events, maliciously barbaric, serve to accurately describe the existence James lives in. In the scenes in the story where the vocabulary and situations appear, they are necessary. I feel they are necessary to maintain the authenticity of this story. Yeah, in historical fiction, the history has to be factual and the fiction must be realistic. This vocabulary, these situations describe the way people talk, the way people thought, the way people felt, what people did at that time in our country's history. And it required a harsh edge. It is my hope that not only are you entertained by A Journey for Abiri, but that you learn more about the history of our country, the history of African Americans in our country, this United States of America. It is my prayer that I help you realize how far this nation, under God, indivisible, has come, as well as the formidable journey yet to come. In addition, I wish everyone will be persuaded of the necessity of this story and stories like this being made available to all, and recognizing the benefits of weaving these stories into the tapestry of this great country called America. A Journey for Abiri. Yes, it is a story of hurt, humiliation, heartache, but it's much more than that. It's a story of relationships. It's a story of discovery. It's a story of victory. It's a story of faith. It's a story of hope. It's a story of love. It's a story of America. A Journey for Abiri. Now I'm going to close by putting myself in your shoes as a book purchaser. Going to your favorite bookstore and you say, hey, I heard about this book, A Journey for Abiri by A.J. Sam. Do you have a copy? And they'll say, of course we do. But you better get it fast because they're flying off the shelves. You get your copy. The first thing you do is look at the cover. Okay, A Journey for Abiri by A.J. Sam. Now, Sid, I wonder if this is a picture of A.J. Sam as a kid. Let me clear that up right now. I was never that cute. That is not me. Then you may look at the spine. You may even flip to a random page and begin reading. But invariably, what you would do is to go to the back of the book and read the book description, which is what I'm going to do now. Imagine living in a world where every facet of your existence is beyond your control. Imagine living in a world where your God-given physical traits are resented and reviled. Imagine living in a world where your humanity is subject to judicial and social debate. Imagine living in a world where the government of the people, by the people, and for the people is both explicit and implicit in denying you the most basic of human rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. For James, this isn't imagination, but a horrifically callous reality. Despite the stacked odds against him, despite the incredible obstacles he faced, this African American survived and thrived during his journey. A Journey for Abiri beginning starts with James being sold into bondage in the 1840s antebellum South and ends in 1850s New York City as the Confederate attack on Fort Sumter, South Carolina, precipitates the U.S. Civil War. In this work of historical fiction, James reacts to and interacts with historical people and events as this journey takes him far from his brutal beginnings through a life of malicious prejudice and toward a future rife with hopes of freedom, promises of equality, and revelations of self. Before I go, I would like to thank Asala for this opportunity to share my book with you. The staff has been welcoming, encouraging, and helpful more than I ever imagined. A Journey for Abiri is available in paperback and ebook formats worldwide and will be available in an audio format in the coming weeks. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Beverly Davis, and I'm the author of the book, The Road to Redemption. The Road to Redemption, I wrote it birthed out of my personal need to understand what love is, what does it really look like, because it is a Christian-based book uh, based on a parable. Originally, as I did my research for the book, researching love, what it means, what it is not, it looked very much like a research paper. So I decided, let me just spin this into a parable so that it would be understandable to anyone who reads it. My target audience in the beginning would have been women between the ages of 16 and 24. However, I found since it's been published that women and men of all ages are interested in the content. So it's really been a little bit more than what I thought it would be, but it is a book that explains some general principles about what love is and what does it really look like. I was concerned because the Bible says that love never fails. But I'd been in some relationships that did fail. And it was like, okay, God, what was that? What am I missing? What can I see? So in the story that is birthed out of all of that process, it is centered around a young woman by the name of Janice. Chapter 1 talks about her value system and how values are formed in us. When she was a child, she had a normal, happy childhood, and then her family split, and her life kind of tanked out. It went from being an upper middle class family to a low income family. She lost her father, whom she loved dearly. And so she did not realize that all of these situations, she also lost her friends, let me say that as well, because they moved from the upper income neighborhood to a lower income neighborhood. Well, in all of that, there's different things happen to us in our lives, but in all of this for Janice, it created in her a set of values that maybe perhaps had her life not changed, it would have been different, but we each have our own situations. Janice, because of the longing for her father once he was gone, developed a picture of what a man should look like. She had that going on. She had also going on the fact that she wanted to be loved. She was a middle child in the family, and so pretty much overlooked when her needs were not expressed verbally or even when they were expressed. So she had this set of values. Excuse me. It does bring out the fact that we develop blind spots. They're called scotomas or psychological blind spots. Once I encounter a situation, I decide there's nothing I can do about it. I certainly will set it aside and move forward. Well, it drifts further and further into my subconscious. However, my responses to different situations, all of those things remain, they're birthed out of what I've been through. So Janice did not realize that she was just a person who was looking for love. She was looking for two things. She's looking for a father, a handsome man with all the trappings of success, and she was looking for somebody to make her special, birthed out of her middle child syndrome. She meets Jason. Chapter 2, she meets Jason. She has a set of values now that she's not aware are based out of some false kind of values that she's set for herself. And also, she's not aware that what she's looking for is very flawed. If we never go back into ourselves and look at why do I respond like I respond to this or that or the other? What happened to me that makes me respond this way? If we never go through that process, we will continue to make same mistake over and over. And that's why they're called blind spots, because I don't know that that is what is at the root of it, this situation that happened to me so long ago, that I continue to trip over the same thing. That's highlighted in chapter 1. In chapter 2, she meets Jason, who is the epitome of the kind of guy she wants. He's popular in school. He's got all of the great family, all of the things she's lost, and Jason pays her some attention. So her longing to be loved, Janice latches on to that attention from Jason. And Jason brings her to a compromise. So there are 3 sections in the book that we have to pay attention. One is head change, one is heart change, and the other is life change. Janice, in her head change, needed to recognize why she liked this particular kind of person, or why she responded this way, and understand that as a middle child, I have these tendencies. So she needed that head change. In part 2 of the book, chapters 4 and 5, as Jason becomes a part of her life, Jason brings her to compromise. He likes her, but he doesn't believe she's a woman, a girl of faith. She loves God. Her life is set up in a way where she acknowledges God, she prays, and this is again a Christian book. And Janice actually has her plan set. She's going to college. She's picked the college. This is her way of escape from the environment that she found herself in after her family split. Well, Jason systematically dismantles all of her plans. He causes her to, convinces her actually to go where he's going to college. He convinces her to change her plans. He convinces her that her stance on abstinence and those things that were part of her Christian walk, he convinces her that that really doesn't make sense. If you really love me, you'll do this. So the Bible tells us some strict things about love, or some things that we need to understand, and that is love does not dishonor you. Love does not bring you to compromise. Love does not seek its own, it seeks the good of someone else. It seeks the good of the person that is the object of their affection. So Janice, had she consulted the same Bible that she said she believed in, would have understood a little better. This guy, he is trying to satisfy something in himself and not really in love with you. Love is not emotions. It's not I like you, because emotions are fueled by chemicals in our brain. Emotional as a part of my research, I figured out that emotions are, we need them, but they are chemically fueled with endorphins and oxytocin, different chemicals we have in our brain. And emotions, they go away. And lust, it dies. Once you satisfy it, it goes away. So love is not feeling good about somebody, enjoying their company. Infatuation, according to what I learned, lasts from 3 to 5 years. And then when those chemicals stop flowing, you're left with, do I really love this person? Love is something that you do more so than something that you feel. You can't depend on the feelings. And so love, the Bible said, never fails, and it is right, because it takes a person with character, and it takes a person with a certain depth of personality to love you. In her heart change, in the book, Jason, after he is totally compromised to wreck her plans, then he cheats on her. And she finds herself in a situation that so many people do, to say, how did I even get here? How did I let him talk me into this? So there's a chapter called Rebound. Rebound, I did not particularly connect it to the book itself or the story or the parable in the book, because rebound, there are 4 steps that you take to whenever you find yourself where your life has crashed out and you need to come back from it. The first step was just stop. Will Rogers has a wonderful quote that says, when you find yourself in a hole, stop digging. So Janice, once she comes upon Jason and his cheating, she has to just stop and re-wreck her life. She does, however, come to a point where she has to believe what she sees. She has to admit, I had a part in becoming this. I can't just blame the other person or Jason in this case, because my life is not going right. I had to agree to this. I had to allow myself to be drawn into this. And so that's one of the steps that you have to go through to rebound. You have to acknowledge that you had a part of it. Well, as we move on through the story, Janice begins to rebound her life. She turns back to God. She turns back to her own plans. She makes a turn, which is what we call repenting. She takes a turn and she makes a life change. Inevitably, she is redeemed. She is restored. She finds herself back to her, is able to pull her own plans back into place. She's able to disconnect herself from Jason. She is able to move on with her life. One of the key things that she learns is that she needs to believe what she sees. You need to believe what you say. See, a person is exactly who they look like they are. When you see them not being nice to other people, when you see them saying all sorts of things about the person that they used to be involved with, well, you'll be the next one he's talking about. That is who they are. You cannot change them. You cannot bring a new character to them. Janice needed in the beginning to believe what she saw. She does move to her new college. She does rebound from the situation with Jason, but there is a section in there that talks about breadcrumbs. There's a story of about a girl and a boy named Hansel and Gretel who are captured by this witch, and the way they're found is they leave a trail of breadcrumbs. Well, Janice, she does all of this. She moves out of Jason's apartment. She moves to another city in another state. She transfers to another college, but she left a breadcrumb. She left a way back for Jason to find his way back to her. In that, she did not change her phone number. So it is one of the principles in the book to make a clean break. When you make a break, make a clean break. For further study at the end of the book, there is a workbook that can give you more information on each chapter. Each chapter is based on a principle of love from the book of Corinthians in the Christian Bible. And it is just, I believe, a delightful study, which put in story form helps you to understand the principles of love, what love is all about, and how God can redeem you no matter how bad the situation is, no matter how far you sank into whatever it is, no matter how you wreck your life, there is redemption. And that is the foundation of the book, The Road to Redemption. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Mozella Mitchell, and I want to tell you something about my book, Yea, Lord, Moving with the Spirit. Actually, this is a searching, perceptive examination of the 50 years of my service as preacher in the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church ministry and a scholar in the church and university. How I was led into this dual profession. I want to talk about how I survived in it as a Black woman, how social movements and changes in the society impacted my life and ambitions. And most of all, in the book, I try to talk about how God was always working in my life over God was always working in my life over the 50 years in which I was 8 decades, actually. I was talking about the 8 decades, actually, in this, including 50 years. God was guiding, directing, sustaining me, and enabling me to achieve God's purposes for my life. And God was getting the glory out of my life for the good of my family, others, friends, and the church and society. I accepted my role as a divine instrument, and only God could have enabled me to adjust and readjust to the rapid changes taking place from one decade to another in the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement, the women's rights movement, the Black womanist movement, and the changes brought about by Generation X, the me generation, millennials. I think this book can be of inspiration and help to guide many of our young people to see all that God brought me through and how I survived and thrived and even succeeded in such changing circumstances and remain alive today at age 89, still pastoring, doing professional writing, and continuing to inspire younger generations of today. The book consists of 7 chapters and a conclusion. I'd like to tell you what each chapter is about. Chapter 1 is titled God Plants Seeds, and it covers the years I spent in the later civil rights movement and the Black Power movement after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968, while at the same time, I was continuing to teach and serve as advisor to the Black Student Union of Norfolk State University. The chapter covers that community and university uprisings, marches and demonstrations, student takeover at Norfolk State University, my extensive involvement with the students and the community, as well as involvement with William P. Robinson's campaign for the Virginia State House of Delegates, and I was also co-director of the East Ghent Vista Project and other things. And finally, the chapter covers my 2-year leave of absence from Norfolk State University to study as a minister for the MA degree in religious studies, and in process meeting with Howard Thurman, who impacted the rest of my life in profound ways. Subtitles in the chapter include seeking to make something of myself, seeking justice, and seeking wisdom and understanding. I tell you, chapter 2 is titled God Cultivates a Garden. And it covers the next 4 years of my life as a minister, trying to develop my career as both minister and scholar, but mainly as a minister trying to gain a foothold in this predominantly male profession. In chapter 3, this is titled God Gives the Increase. And this chapter covers the 3 years I spent as PhD student in the Institute of Liberal Arts, ILA, at Emory University. I was on leave of absence from Norfolk State University again with partial pay. The Mecca of Black religious and educational heritage of Atlanta, Georgia, provided me with rich historical and contemporary resources with which to expand my development, including those of Martin Luther King Jr. and Howard Thurman, both of whom spent many years here in this area of Atlanta and left rich, inspiring, and enduring legacies. I was blessed to share in this place for those 3 years. Chapter 4 is titled God Reaps the Harvest, and it covers my return to Norfolk State University after leaving the Emory having been away at Emory for 3 years and had achieved that PhD degree. And so I returned to Norfolk State University for 1 more year and served for 1 year as assistant professor at the University of South Florida in the Religious Studies Department. But the following year, applying for and being hired in the tenure track position as assistant professor of religious studies at the University of South Florida. Here I remained for 33 years and was able to really develop extensively as a minister and a scholar, teaching full-time, pastoring full-time, doing research, and traveling to 6 continents, gathering resource materials, writing numerous articles published in refereed journals, and publishing 4 books. And among many other achievements, including chairing the Religious Studies Department for 6 years and serving as pastor of Mount Sinai AME Zion Church for 7.5 years, and serving as presiding elder of the Tampa district of the AME Zion Church for 17 years. Having retired as professor emeritus in 2014, I still serve as pastor of Love of Christ AME Zion Tabernacle Incorporated in Brandon, Florida, a few miles outside Tampa, Florida. And my family and I founded this church, and I have pastored it for over 25 years, right at 30 years. I'm in the 29th year. Chapter 5 is titled God prunes the branches. And this 5th chapter covers the various ways in which God has dealt with me from both respects in educational, scholarly, community, social, and spiritual development in order to keep me on the righteous path in which he placed me and enrich my life to his glory. Chapter 6 is titled God Enlarges the Garden and contains the many travels, national and international, both for scholarly and ministry purposes, including those in campaigning for bishop in the AME Zion Church. Chapter 7, the final chapter, is titled Garden Graces, and includes other travels, national and international, and my role as chair of the Religious Studies Department and its challenges. There were many challenges, as well as other challenges in the ministry. And ultimately, my retirement from the university after 33 years. Retirement celebration is covered in the chapter. An award of Professor Emeritus by the University of South Florida, and taking on greater responsibility as chair of the Committee on Uniform Series, CUS, of the National Council of Churches of Christ, USA. The conclusion gives a wrap-up and short review of the 50-year span of my ministry, scholarship, and teaching, and introduces the planning of the 50th year anniversary celebration dinner for April 2020. But this did not take place until June. Now, I began the book with the first chapter. In the first chapter, I began with the words, where did it all begin? Psalm 139 attests, for it was you who formed my inward parts. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works that I know very well. My frame was not hidden from you. When I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth, your eyes beheld my unformed substance. In your book were written all the days that were formed for me, when none of them as yet existed. These are the words of Psalm 139, verses 13 through 16. I have lived for the Lord. I am living for the Lord. For you, O Lord, have accomplished your will and purposes for my life. I am consciously awaiting you and the movement of your spirit, even though I have consciously pursued what was in my heart and in my mind at given times. I have never been beyond your direct hand of influence. Your mercies, O Lord, have been new every morning in all these many decades. I'm exceedingly grateful for the privilege of sharing this with you and for your kind listening ear. Thank you very much.